Hey everybody, Mike Nelson, CEO, Efficient Lending Incorporated. Happy May 6th to you. Hope you all had a great Cinco de Mayo. Look, today's topic, we're going to be a little bit longer on the post, but we're going to talk about rates, real estate, and recession. We're going to talk about some of the dynamics that are going on in the marketplace today. So I've got a great presentation prepared for you. My data source is MBS Highway, Barry Habib's group. So this just isn't Mike's opinion. This is going to really dive into some of the market dynamics and what we can expect going forward. But let me tell you the spoiler alert. And I think it's actually really good news, is that, guys, this is not the first time we've been in a real estate market with high inflation, potentially inventory issues, things of that nature, global unrest. The good news is this. If as real estate professionals, buyers and sellers, we understand some of these market dynamics that are going into play, we can see how history somewhat repeats itself. I'm going to go through that history here just briefly with you in this presentation. There's a bright outlook for real estate. We just need to know how to navigate it. Are we going to have a few tough months down the road? Well, sure, of course we are. But I think there really is a bright outlook for real estate and what we can expect in the future. So let's just start with kind of rates, real estate, and recession. Look, we're going to dive into three main topics here in this short presentation. We're talking about inflation. We're going to talk about when we have inflation, what does the Fed do? What historically have they done? What does balance sheet runoff mean? And we're going to talk about recession. And I'll give you a spoiler alert, guys. It's a virtual statistical certainty that we're going to have a recession. And I'm just telling you up front, let me walk you down this path. But real estate generally does pretty well when there is a recession. So that's good. Let's talk about inflation and let's see the Fed history. So if we go back to Volcker and Burns when they're the Fed chair, we saw inflation going from 7 to 14%. You can see it right here. And we can see the Fed funds rate went from 11% to 20%. And inflation's response is it dipped. And so what happened? We went into recession, but what did mortgage rates do? They went down from 18% to about 12%. Then you can see the history through Alan Greenspan to where we are today with Jerome Powell. We've gone from 1.5% to 8.5%. And guys, the Fed has proven to be boom and bust throughout history. They did it again just this time last year. The Fed was talking about no anticipated inflation, transitory inflation. And I was saying on my YouTube channel, this is nuts. We're going to have big inflation. And the Fed's going to go into the boom and bust cycle. And sure enough, what's happened? They've gone from 3%, 0 to 3%. Inflation is going to be tempered because they're going to keep raising rates until it does. And we should see a decline once we get into recession of interest rates. So those rates are where we're at now. We're going to keep going up. But as we get into recession, more than likely the Fed is going to respond with lowering rates. So you hear two things in the marketplace right now. You hear, and this is where a lot of confusion comes in, and I hear a lot of misspeak by real estate agents, sometimes lenders, certainly buyers and sellers. Because when the Fed increases rates, the federal funds rates, the bond market, mortgages typically like that. Why? The mortgage market wants to actively see the Fed pursue killing inflation, because inflation is the arch enemy of a bond. So typically, when the Fed raises rates, mortgage interest rates respond favorably. So look at 2016. The Fed hiked 25 basis points, mortgage rates went down. Inflation comes back a little bit, they hike again. Rates go down, rates go down, rates go down. But then we see the blue here, and that's the runoff is correlated to how the Fed runs off their balance sheet. I'm not going to dive into that. I really encourage you to give me a call. I can walk you through what this means. But in essence, when the Fed aggressively runs off their balance sheet, they're putting risk into the mortgage market. And when you put risk into the mortgage market, what happens? Yeah, it may tame inflation, but mortgages don't like it. They don't like the extra risk. And so rates rise even though the Fed is raising their federal funds rate. So you got to understand when you're hearing media, thinking about these two pieces here. What happens when the Fed increases interest rates, but also what happens when they do an aggressive runoff on their balance sheet. Again, a little bit of a deeper dive than I want to get into on this video, but just call me and I'll walk you through what it means. You kind of need to know just a high level understanding of this. So if you're a real estate agent, you can walk your buyers and sellers through it. But if you're a buyer and seller, you kind of want to understand so you can figure out what happens. Now, let's move on. Inversions of the 10-year and the 2-year. Again, I'm not going to dive into what those treasuries are and the yields, but when the yields invert, which they did a couple weeks ago, it's almost a statistical certainty that we will go into recession. So we are going to be in a recession. It's going to happen. And that's going to be a good news thing for real estate at least, not for others, stock market, whatnot, but for real estate at least. So when they invert, what's the history? Because I want to focus on history. 1980, it inverted, and here's the recession, these kind of white bars. So you can see where the 10-year and 2-year have inverted, recession is soon to follow, okay? So let's talk about unemployment. So when unemployment hits its lowest rates, which pretty much we think it may have bottomed out or is it's going to bottom out, we typically see recession soon to follow, and it makes intuitive sense because when there's really low unemployment rates, employers now have to pay higher wages to gain and keep employees. And so typically when you look at the inversion of the 10-year, 2-year, when you look at balance sheet runs off, and then when you look at unemployment rates, you almost always have recessions. Now, let's look at historically what happens when you have to mortgage rates when you're in recession. Again, the vertical bars are what's going on with interest rates and then in recession. And so you can see all across here, the mortgage rates in times of recession are declining. I think we're going to see recession towards the last quarter of 2022, maybe the first part of 2023. And so consequently, I would anticipate interest rates are going to come back. All right, what happens to housing when we go into recession? Well, this is the Case-Shiller House Price Index, and you'll see in every period of inflation, what we had was an actual growth in housing, except for the crash of 2008, and that was for a completely different reason. Remember, if you could basically fog a mirror in 2007, 2008, you could get as many mortgages as you wanted. So when we were in that recession, we had homes that just flat out weren't simply collateralized. They were upside down. And so that's why we see the anomaly of housing not doing well during that recession. And also in 2008, we had record high inventory, okay? Right now, we're at record low inventory. So when I hear people say we're in a housing bubble, we're going to crash like 2007, that's just not accurate because the market dynamics of the collateralization of homes is different, the economics of that time period are different, and also the inventory is completely different. So are we in a housing bubble akin to 2007? No, we're not. Could housing crash? Sure. It might. I don't know. I don't think it is. I don't believe it is. But we got to understand that 2007 is not what's happening in 2022, 2023 to come. So, and the other pieces that you want to look at 2007 is we had 14 million fewer households than we do today, and we have, in that same dynamic, 3 million fewer homes in the inventory than we did back in 2007. So we're not in a bubble. Housing is strong. It just is, and people need to understand that. So that really is the picture that I want to paint, is that, look, is this a challenging time right now? Yes. Do we face inventory issues? Do we face inflation? Yes. Do we face rising mortgage rates? Yes. Do we have supply chain issues? Yes. How is the Fed going to respond? They're going to fight inflation. They're going to stop inflation. We are going to go into recession. And typically, historically, we know that when we go into recession, housing does well. There's other parts of the economy that don't, and that's not good. We don't want anybody to suffer. But in this industry, I think we generally do well. So what's the message? If you're a real estate agent, it's all about building relationships with our buyers and sellers right now. If you're a lender, it's the same. We really want to coach people through the timing of this market, when the best time to get in, how we handle the changing market dynamics. And if you're a buyer and a seller, look, I would get into the market. Why? Because if rates come down 6, 8, 9 a year from now, just refinance out of it. There's going to be other ways to handle it. And those are the things that we can talk about. All right, bit of a long video for today for this topic. I hope you find the information helpful, and I would strongly encourage you, feel free to call me anytime to talk in more detail about what's going on in our market. Have a great finish to 2022, and I'm looking forward to a bright 2023.